She can never find out the truth. As long as she believes it was all a lie, we're safe. The moment I heard those words, I froze. My hand was still wrapped around the grocery bag, but suddenly I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. My heart pounded, so hard it drowned out everything else. That voice, it was my husband's. For 18 years, I had defended him against everyone. When my parents warned me that something about him didn't add up, I cut them out of my life. When our neighbors whispered behind our backs, I called them jealous. When an old friend tried to show me proof that my husband wasn't the man I thought he was, I accused her of trying to destroy my marriage. I stood by him every single time, because I believed one thing with all my heart, that my husband was the victim. But that night, one conversation, hidden behind a half-closed kitchen door, shattered everything I thought I knew. It wasn't just my marriage that was built on lies. It was my entire life. And the most terrifying part, the truth, wasn't what everyone had been accusing him of. It was something far worse. Something no one, not even I, had ever imagined. Before we begin, I want to hear from you. If you discovered your spouse had been hiding a life-changing secret for years, would you confront them immediately, or would you quietly gather the truth first? Leave your answer in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. If you enjoy emotional family dramas with shocking plot twists that completely change the way you see the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Back to the day I truly believed I was the luckiest wife in the world, completely unaware that the biggest lie of my life had already begun the moment I said, I do. My name is Alara Whitmore, and until 3 weeks ago, I believed I had the kind of marriage people secretly wish they had. I was 42 years old, living in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, where nothing ever seemed dramatic enough to make the evening news. Every morning started the same way. I woke up before sunrise, brewed coffee while the neighborhood was still asleep, packed lunches, and listened to the familiar creaks of a house that had been our home for almost 2 decades. Our daughter, Maeve, was 17 and already filling out college applications. Our son, Callan, had just turned 14 and was obsessed with baseball. Between soccer practices, school events, grocery shopping, and my part-time bookkeeping job at a local veterinary clinic, life felt comfortably predictable. And honestly, I liked predictable. People often asked me what the secret to a long marriage was. I always smiled and gave the same answer. Trust. Not love. Not passion. Trust. Because love changes. People grow older. They argue. They disappoint each other. But if trust survives, everything else somehow finds its way back. At least that's what I believed. My husband, Rowan, had been my best friend since I was 23. We met at a charity fundraiser after my older sister insisted I stop hiding behind work and meet someone who wasn't a spreadsheet. Rowan wasn't the loudest man in the room. He wasn't the richest. He wasn't even the funniest. But he listened. When I spoke, he listened as though every word mattered. When I doubted myself, he somehow knew exactly what to say. Within a year, we were married. Everyone called us lucky. Even after 18 years, he still kissed my forehead before leaving for work. He still texted me every afternoon. Did you eat lunch? Drive safely. Love you. Small things. Simple things. The kind of things that make a marriage feel alive long after the honeymoon ends. Of course, our life wasn't perfect. No marriage ever is. About 6 years earlier, Rowan had become involved in a legal investigation at the engineering company where he worked. Someone had manipulated financial records. Millions of dollars had disappeared through fake vendor accounts. Several executives were questioned. One was arrested. 4 months, Rowan lived under suspicion. The local newspapers mentioned his department repeatedly, although they never formally accused him of committing a crime. The investigation eventually moved on. No charges were ever filed against him. His company quietly settled the case. Life returned to normal. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. Not everyone believed Rowan was innocent, especially my younger brother, Declan. I don't trust him, Declan told me one Thanksgiving. You're seeing ghosts, I replied. I'm seeing patterns. There are no patterns. He always has an explanation before anyone even asks a question. Because he's honest. Declan sighed. I hope you're right. I didn't speak to him for nearly 8 months after that conversation. Not because he insulted Rowan. Because he insulted my judgment, If I couldn't trust the man I'd shared a bed with for 18 years, who could I trust? Eventually, Declan apologized. Or at least something close to an apology. We started talking again, but I never forgot what he'd said. Neither did Rowan. Whenever Declan's name came up, Rowan would simply smile and change the subject. Looking back now, that should have bothered me, but it didn't, because I interpreted silence as maturity, not avoidance. There were other moments too. Little moments. Tiny details that disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. Once, I found Rowan sitting alone in the garage long after midnight. The lights were off. He was staring at nothing. When I asked if he was okay, he smiled. Just thinking. About what? Work. Another time, I noticed he had started locking his phone. That was unusual. 4 years. Neither of us had passwords we kept from each other. When I joked about it, he laughed. Cybersecurity training at work. They scared us all. It sounded reasonable. So I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Then there was the envelope. A plain white envelope arrived one Tuesday afternoon with no return address. I placed it on the kitchen counter beside the mail. When Rowan came home and saw it, his smile disappeared. Only for a second. Maybe less. But I noticed. What is it? I asked. I have no idea. He picked it up before I could. Opened it. Read whatever was inside. Then calmly folded the paper. It's just junk. He walked outside. Straight to the trash bin. I remember thinking that was strange. Not suspicious. Just strange. I almost followed him. Almost. Instead, I finished making dinner. Because that's what trust does. It convinces you that every unanswered question already has an innocent answer. Even when you never actually hear it. 3 weeks ago, everything still felt ordinary. If someone had told me my entire understanding of my marriage was about to collapse, I would have laughed. Because the biggest disasters don't usually announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as another perfectly normal Tuesday. And that's exactly how it began. With leftover lasagna, a forgotten grocery bag, and a conversation I was never supposed to hear. Tuesday evenings had a rhythm of their own. Rowan usually arrived home just after 6. Maeve would disappear upstairs with homework she insisted couldn't wait, even though I knew half of it involved texting her best friend. Callan would throw his backpack near the stairs despite being reminded 100 times not to. Rowan would loosen his tie, kiss my forehead, ask what smelled so good, and complain good-naturedly that someone had eaten all the hot sauce again. That Tuesday started exactly the same. Nothing felt different. Nothing warned me that by the end of the night I would question every memory I'd built over 18 years. I had stopped at the grocery store after work and picked up everything for the week. Fresh vegetables, coffee beans Rowan liked, ground beef, laundry detergent, the chocolate chip ice cream Callan always begged for. When I pulled into the driveway, Rowan's SUV was already there. That surprised me. He was rarely home before me. I carried the first 2 grocery bags inside, balancing them awkwardly against my hip while kicking the front door shut with my foot. The house was strangely quiet. No television. No music. No Callan yelling at his video game. No sound of Maeve talking on the phone. Hello! I called. No answer. I assumed everyone was upstairs. I set the groceries on the kitchen island and remembered there were still several bags in the trunk. As I turned to leave, I heard voices. At first I smiled. Rowan must have been on a work call. His company often dealt with clients in different time zones. But then I noticed something odd. His voice wasn't coming from his office. It was coming from the old breakfast room, just beyond the kitchen. That room hadn't been used much since we remodeled the house years ago. The pocket door separating it from the kitchen was almost closed. Almost. Just enough for voices to slip through. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I simply walked toward the hallway, intending to ask if he could help carry the rest of the groceries. Then I heard a woman's voice. Soft. Calm. Unfamiliar. I stopped. She's never questioned anything, the woman said quietly. I frowned. Who was she talking about? Rowan answered almost immediately. She trusts me. The words made me smile for half a second. Of course he was talking about me. Trust had always been the foundation of our marriage. Then the woman laughed. Not cruelly. Not kindly either. More like someone amused by an inside joke. That's exactly why she'll never see it coming. Every muscle in my body tightened. I should have walked in. I should have announced myself. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, hidden behind the wall, listening. You said the documents were gone, the woman whispered. They are. And the copies. I took care of them years ago. Silence. Then, what about Declan? The moment I heard my brother's name, my heartbeat stumbled. Rowan let out a slow breath. He still thinks the investigation was about money. It wasn't. No. Another pause. So he never figured it out? No. And Alara? My own name. Hearing it spoken in that quiet room felt strangely invasive. She doesn't know enough to ask the right questions. I felt my fingers go numb. Not because I understood what they were talking about. Because I didn't. None of it made sense. Investigation. Documents. Declan. What documents? What questions? I searched desperately for a logical explanation. Maybe they were discussing an old lawsuit. Maybe this woman was an attorney. Maybe. My mind kept inventing innocent possibilities faster than my heart could reject them. Then Rowan spoke again. The truth would destroy her. A chill ran through me. The woman lowered her voice even further. You've lived with her for 18 years. I know. Doesn't that make this harder? Rowan didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost emotionless. It stopped being hard a long time ago. I felt something inside me crack. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like thin ice giving way beneath someone's feet. I wanted to burst into the room, demand answers, scream, cry. Instead, I stood perfectly still, frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Callan. He was coming down toward the kitchen. Panic hit me instantly. If he saw me standing there listening, if Rowan opened the door, everything would explode before I even understood what I had heard. I grabbed the nearest grocery bag from the hallway floor and hurried toward the front door just as Callan reached the stairs. Mom! Oh! I forced a smile. I forgot the rest of the groceries. You already brought some in. I know. I just forgot a few. He shrugged. I'll help. No. The word came out much louder than I intended. Callan blinked. You okay? I swallowed hard. Yeah, I spilled something in the trunk. It was a terrible lie. He looked confused but followed me outside anyway. The cold evening air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't afraid of what I'd heard. I was afraid of what I hadn't heard. Because whatever Rowan and that woman were hiding, they weren't talking like two people planning an affair. They were talking like two people protecting a secret that had been buried for nearly 2 decades. And somehow, my brother had been closer to the truth than I had ever allowed myself to believe. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Rowan's voice again. The truth would destroy her. The sentence echoed over and over until sunrise. At 6:30 the next morning, Rowan kissed my forehead before leaving for work, just like he had every weekday for nearly 18 years. Don't work too hard today, he said with a smile. His eyes looked exactly the same. His voice sounded exactly the same. His hands felt exactly the same when they touched my shoulder. Nothing about him had changed. Only me. For the first time in our marriage, I looked at my husband and wondered. Who are you? I'll probably be late, he added while grabbing his travel mug. Big meeting. Yeah. He hesitated for less than a second. Corporate audit. That word hit me harder than it should have. Audit. Why did everything suddenly seem connected to investigations, documents, and secrets? I forced a smile. Drive safely. I always do. He smiled back, walked out the front door, and disappeared into the morning fog. I stood at the kitchen window long after his SUV vanished around the corner. For 18 years, I had never once questioned whether he was telling me the truth. Now, I questioned every sentence he spoke. I tried convincing myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe the woman was a lawyer. Maybe Rowan had been protecting someone else's privacy. Maybe they were discussing confidential business matters. Maybe. But every explanation collapsed beneath one simple question. Why hide it from me? If there was nothing wrong, why whisper behind a closed door? Why wait until the children weren't around? Why say I could never find out? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. By lunchtime, I had made exactly one decision. I wasn't going to confront Rowan. Not yet. Because if he really had spent years hiding something, he would already have an explanation prepared. I needed facts, not excuses. That afternoon, I drove to the veterinary clinic where I worked 3 days a week. I entered numbers into spreadsheets, answered phone calls, smiled at customers, even laughed once when a golden retriever stole another dog's tennis ball in the waiting room. Outside, I looked perfectly normal. Inside, I was unraveling. Around 3 o'clock my phone buzzed. Rowan, running late. Don't wait for dinner. Normally I would have replied immediately. Instead, I stared at the message. Was he really working late? Or meeting the same woman again? For the first time in 18 years, I didn't know. I typed 3 different replies before settling on one. Okay, be careful. 3 minutes later, a heart emoji appeared. Something so ordinary. Something that once would have made me smile. Instead, it made my stomach turn. When my shift ended, I didn't drive home. I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in almost a year. Declan's house. My younger brother opened the front door wearing jeans, an old college sweatshirt, and an expression that instantly changed when he saw my face. Elle. I hadn't heard anyone call me that since our mother passed away. You okay? The words disappeared. He stepped aside. Come in. His house smelled like coffee and cedarwood, exactly as I remembered. I'll make tea, he said. I don't want tea. He stopped walking. Then why are you here? For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question I had spent years refusing to hear. Back then. When? When you said you didn't trust Rowan? Declan slowly put the kettle back on the counter. I remember. Why? His eyes searched my face carefully. What happened? Just answer me. He leaned against the kitchen island. I never said Rowan was guilty. You implied it. No. You said something didn't add up. Because it didn't. What didn't? Declan folded his arms. The investigation. I felt my heartbeat accelerate. What about it? The money never made sense. I frowned. I thought that's exactly what it was about. That's what everyone believed. He shook his head. Too many people focused on the missing money. What should they have focused on? The files. My pulse quickened. What files? He looked genuinely surprised. He never told you? Told me what? Declan hesitated, then slowly walked toward a cabinet. He pulled out an old cardboard storage box. The edges were faded with age. Dust covered the lid. I kept these because I thought someday. He stopped speaking. You might ask. My mouth suddenly felt dry. He placed the box on the dining table. Inside were newspaper clippings, court records, printed emails, photographs. Most were nearly 20 years old. I looked at the first newspaper headline. Local engineering firm under federal investigation. I remembered seeing it. I remembered crying. I remembered defending Rowan against everyone. Declan slid another document toward me. This article never made national news. I picked it up. Halfway down the page, one sentence caught my attention. Investigators are reportedly searching for internal project archives believed to have disappeared weeks before financial discrepancies were discovered. Project archives? Not money. Files. My breathing slowed, exactly like the woman had mentioned the night before. You see it now? Declan asked quietly. I don't understand. Neither did I. He sat across from me. That's what bothered me. The missing files. Yes. I looked back at the article. What was inside them? Declan stared at me for several long seconds. Then he answered with a sentence that made every hair on my arm stand up. I've spent 18 years trying to figure that out. Because whatever was inside those files, someone believed it was worth destroying an entire family's life to keep them hidden. Declan's last sentence stayed with me the entire drive home. Someone believed it was worth destroying an entire family's life to keep them hidden. I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia. My brother had never liked Rowan. Maybe 18 years had turned suspicion into obsession. That had to be it. It was the only explanation that still allowed me to believe my marriage wasn't built on lies. By the time I pulled into the driveway, Rowan's SUV was already parked in the garage. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. I took a deep breath before walking inside. The smell of grilled chicken drifted from the kitchen. Rowan looked up and smiled as if nothing in the world had changed. Hey, you're home early. My meeting got canceled. He walked over and kissed my cheek. For a split second, I almost broke down. I almost asked him everything. Who was the woman? What documents? Why did you say the truth would destroy me? Instead, I smiled. That's nice. His eyes lingered on my face. You look tired. Long day. He nodded. Sit down. Dinner's almost ready. That was Rowan. Calm, patient, attentive. Exactly the man I'd loved for 18 years. If he was lying, he was better at it than anyone I'd ever met. Dinner felt strangely normal. Callan talked nonstop about baseball tryouts. Maeve complained about college essays. Rowan laughed at the right moments, asked the kids questions, refilled everyone's drinks. Watching him, I couldn't reconcile the man at this table with the voice I'd heard behind the kitchen door. Nothing matched. Not his smile. Not his kindness. Not the way he looked at our children. If someone had secretly recorded this dinner, they'd swear we were the happiest family in Ohio. Maybe I really had misunderstood everything. After dinner, Rowan carried the trash outside. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Without thinking, I looked at the screen. A known number. The preview contained only 6 words. Tomorrow. Same place. Don't be late. My stomach tightened. Before I could read anything else, Rowan walked back inside. He picked up the phone so naturally that I doubted he'd noticed I'd seen it. Work? I asked casually. He slipped the phone into his pocket. Yeah. Another meeting? Unfortunately. He smiled again. I wish it wasn't. It was such an ordinary answer. The kind I'd accepted hundreds of times before. This time, it felt rehearsed. The next morning, I made a decision I never imagined I'd make. I called the veterinary clinic. I'm not feeling well, I lied. Take the day off, my manager replied. Feel better. As soon as Rowan left for work, I waited 10 minutes before grabbing my car keys. I hated myself for what I was doing. Following your spouse wasn't something people in healthy marriages did. But neither was whispering behind closed doors. Rowan drove across town instead of heading toward his office. I stayed several cars behind, terrified he'd notice me. He finally pulled into the parking lot of a quiet cafe I had never visited. No office buildings. No construction sites. No clients. Just a small neighborhood cafe with outdoor seating. 5 minutes later, a woman arrived. She looked to be in her early 40s. Dark hair tied back neatly. Simple navy coat. No flashy jewelry. No dramatic entrance. She sat across from Rowan. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. They simply started talking. I couldn't hear a single word from where I was parked. But what I saw was enough to make my heart sink. She reached across the table. Touched his hand. Only for a second. Rowan didn't pull away. Instead, he lowered his head and closed his eyes. My chest tightened. Every logical explanation I'd built over the last 24 hours suddenly began to crumble. Maybe Declan had been wrong. Maybe there were no secret files, no hidden investigation. Maybe the truth was far simpler and far more painful. Maybe my husband wasn't hiding a crime. Maybe he was hiding another woman. The thought hit me harder than anything I'd imagined. Not because it explained everything, but because it explained enough. The late meetings, the locked phone, the whispered conversations, the unknown messages, the secret appointments. One by one, the pieces began fitting together into a picture I never wanted to see. I sat frozen behind the steering wheel, unable to look away. Then something happened that made my heart stop. The woman slid a small envelope across the table. It looked almost identical to the plain, white envelope Rowan had thrown away days earlier. He didn't open it. He simply slipped it inside his jacket. Then he looked directly toward the parking lot. Toward me. For one horrifying second, I was certain he'd seen me. I ducked instinctively below the dashboard, barely daring to breathe. When I finally looked up again, their table was empty. I stayed crouched behind the steering wheel for nearly 30 seconds. My heart hammered so violently that I could hear it echoing inside the car. When I finally looked up, Rowan's SUV was already pulling out of the parking lot. I waited another minute before starting my engine. Part of me wanted to follow him again. Another part wanted to drive home, crawl into bed, and pretend none of this had happened. Instead, I parked where his SUV had been. The cafe looked ordinary. A few people worked on laptops. An elderly couple shared a slice of pie. 2 college students laughed over iced coffees. Nothing about the place suggested secrets. Nothing about it explained why my husband had lied to me. I walked inside, the scent of freshly ground coffee wrapped around me, but it did nothing to calm the knot in my stomach. A young barista greeted me with a cheerful smile. "Good morning. What can I get started for you?" "A latte, please." As she prepared my drink, I glanced toward the corner table where Rowan had been sitting. It was already empty. No envelope, no forgotten receipt, no clue. Just 2 clean coffee cups waiting to be collected. I felt ridiculous. What exactly had I expected to find? A written confession. I thanked the barista, picked up my coffee, and turned toward the exit. Then I noticed something taped to a community bulletin board beside the door. A photograph. Several people, standing together at what looked like a charity fundraising event. For a split second, my breath caught. One of the men looked remarkably like Rowan. I stepped closer. The image was old and slightly faded. The faces were small. I couldn't be certain. Before I could study it further, another customer walked in front of me. When my view cleared again, I realized I'd been mistaken. It wasn't Rowan, just someone with similar features. I let out a nervous laugh. Maybe I was starting to imagine connections that weren't there. Maybe suspicion had already changed the way I saw the world. That afternoon, I couldn't stop replaying what I'd witnessed. The woman touching Rowan's hand. The envelope. The secret meeting. Every memory of our marriage suddenly seemed uncertain. I opened the photo album in our living room. Vacation pictures. Christmas mornings. Anniversaries. Birthdays. Rowan's arm was around me in almost every photograph. His smile never looked forced. Neither did mine. Was it possible for someone to fake 18 years of happiness? Or was I allowing one strange conversation to erase a lifetime of love? The questions had no answers, only doubt. At dinner that evening, Rowan seemed unusually relaxed. "So," he said, serving mashed potatoes onto my plate, "anything interesting happened today?" The question sounded harmless, yet my pulse quickened. Was he simply making conversation, or checking whether I had discovered something? "Not really," I replied. "What about work?" The audit wrapped up earlier than expected. There was that word again. Audit. I looked into his eyes, searching for hesitation. Nothing. He met my gaze without blinking. If he was lying, he'd perfected it. Maeve interrupted before I could ask another question. "Dad, are you coming to my debate tournament Saturday?" "I wouldn't miss it. You promised last year, too." "I know. I'm serious this time." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'll be there." Watching them together hurt more than I expected. He looked like a devoted father. The kind of man who remembered every birthday, every school event, every little victory. How could that same man be living a secret life? Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed Rowan's home office, I noticed a thin strip of light beneath the door. He was still awake, typing. Normally, I would have knocked. Instead, I paused. The office door wasn't completely closed, just barely open. Through the narrow gap, I saw Rowan sitting at his desk. His laptop was open. Several papers were spread across the surface. He picked up his phone and made a call. His voice was low enough that I couldn't hear every word. Only fragments. "No, she doesn't suspect. Saturday changes everything." After that, silence. Then, no mistakes this time. A chill crept down my spine. Saturday. What was happening on Saturday? Maeve's debate tournament? Was that what he meant? Or something else entirely? Before I could listen longer, one of the wooden floorboards creaked beneath my foot. Rowan stopped talking instantly. The silence on the other side of the door felt endless. Then I heard his chair move. He was coming. I hurried toward the kitchen, grabbed a glass from the cabinet, and turned on the faucet just as he stepped into the hallway. "You couldn't sleep?" he asked. I forced a yawn. "Just thirsty." He smiled. "I'll be up in a minute." I nodded and walked away without looking back. But as I climbed the stairs, one thought refused to leave my mind. Whatever Rowan was hiding, it was reaching a deadline. And according to the conversation I had just overheard, everything would change on Saturday. I just didn't know whether that change would save my family or destroy it forever. Saturday arrived much sooner than I wanted. For the rest of the week, I barely spoke unless someone asked me a direct question. I smiled when the kids looked at me. I laughed when Rowan made jokes. I folded laundry, paid bills, made dinner, played the role of a normal wife so convincingly that even I almost believed it. But every night, after everyone had gone to bed, I replayed every strange moment from the past 18 years. The locked phone, the anonymous envelope, the whispered conversation, the woman at the cafe. Saturday changes everything. Those 4 words had become a countdown inside my head. I didn't know what was supposed to happen. I only knew I couldn't sit back and wait anymore. Rowan left the house just after 8 that morning. He was wearing the navy suit he usually saved for important business meetings. "Wish Maeve good luck for me if I don't make it before her first round," he said while adjusting his tie. I stared at him. "I thought you promised you'd be there." "I'll try my best." "Try. Not I'll be there. Just, I'll try." Maeve looked disappointed but forced a smile. "It's okay." No, it wasn't okay. For the first time, I caught myself wondering how many promises Rowan had quietly broken over the years while I was too busy believing every excuse. He kissed my forehead. "I love you." The words came so naturally, so effortlessly. I answered automatically. "I love you too." But the sentence felt heavier than it ever had before. The moment his SUV disappeared down the street, I made my decision. I wasn't taking the kids to the debate tournament. Not yet. I called Maeve's coach and apologized, saying we'd be running a little late. Then I followed Rowan. Again. This time, he didn't drive toward the cafe. He headed downtown, past the courthouse, past the financial district, past City Hall. Finally, he pulled into the parking garage of an older brick building that looked more like a private office than a corporate headquarters. There was no company logo, no sign explaining what businesses occupied the building. Just a brass directory near the entrance. I parked across the street and watched. 5 minutes later, the same woman from the cafe arrived. She wasn't alone. A gray-haired man in an expensive charcoal suit stepped out of another car and greeted Rowan with a firm handshake. Then all 3 disappeared inside. No hugs, no romance, no stolen kisses, nothing that resembled an affair. For reasons I couldn't explain. That disappointed me. Not because I wanted Rowan to be unfaithful, but because an affair was something I could understand. Affairs happen. They're painful. They're cruel. But they're simple. This wasn't simple anymore. I crossed the street carefully and entered the lobby. The receptionist smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for..." My eyes scanned the brass directory. Most of the offices were law firms, insurance agencies, consultants. Then one listing caught my attention. Hamilton and Pierce, private mediation services. Mediation? That didn't make sense. Why would Rowan meet with mediators? The receptionist interrupted my thoughts. "Ma'am!" "Oh, sorry. Wrong building." I walked back outside before she became suspicious. From the sidewalk, I looked up toward the 4th floor. Several windows overlooked the street. One of them had its blinds partially open. 3 silhouettes stood inside. One was definitely Rowan. The other 2 faced him across a conference table. Nobody looked angry. Nobody looked frightened. Whatever was happening, it looked planned, professional, almost routine. I waited. 1 hour. Then 2. Around noon, the meeting finally ended. The gray-haired man left first. The woman followed a few minutes later. Rowan remained inside. I considered leaving. Instead, I stayed. 15 minutes later, Rowan emerged carrying a thin black portfolio instead of the envelope I'd seen earlier that week. He looked exhausted. Not guilty. Not relieved. Just tired. As if whatever had happened upstairs had drained every ounce of energy from him. Then something unexpected happened. He didn't drive home. He drove to Greenwood Memorial Cemetery. My breath caught. I parked several rows away and watched him walk alone between the headstones. He stopped in front of a grave I couldn't read from where I stood. Slowly, he knelt, rested one hand against the stone, lowered his head, and stayed there for nearly 10 minutes. No phone, no conversation, no woman, just silence. When he finally stood, I expected him to leave. Instead, he took something from the black portfolio, a photograph. He looked at it for several long seconds before placing it gently against the headstone. Even from a distance, I could tell his hands were trembling. I had never seen Rowan cry, not when his father died, not when he lost his job years earlier. not even at our mother's funeral. But standing alone in that cemetery, I watched him wipe tears from his face, real tears, uncontrolled, raw. My certainty cracked for the first time since I had overheard the conversation. Who was buried there? Why had he never told me about this place? And why did the man I believed was hiding a terrible secret suddenly look like someone carrying unbearable grief? As Rowan walked back toward his SUV, I stayed hidden behind a large oak tree, afraid he might see me. Only after he drove away did I approach the grave. My pulse pounded in my ears. The name on the headstone came into focus. I stopped walking. Every thought vanished, because the name carved into the granite was one I had never heard before. And somehow, I knew that discovering who that person was would change everything I believed about my husband. I stood in front of the grave for what felt like forever. The autumn wind carried dry leaves across the cemetery, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on the name engraved into the polished granite. Adrian Mercer, 1980 to 2008. Beneath, it was a single sentence. You carried the truth until the very end. I read those words again, and again. They meant nothing to me. I had never heard the name Adrian Mercer. Not once. Not during 18 years of marriage. Not during family dinners. Not during holidays. Not while looking through old photographs. Nothing. If Adrian had mattered enough for Rowan to visit his grave in secret, how had I never known he existed? I looked around, making sure no one was nearby. The photograph Rowan had left was still leaning against the headstone. I hesitated. It felt wrong, like crossing a line I could never uncross. But I needed answers. I picked it up carefully. The picture was almost 20 years old. 3 young men stood shoulder to shoulder, covered in dust, wearing bright orange safety vests at what looked like a construction site. One of them was unmistakably Rowan. He looked younger, leaner. His smile was carefree in a way I'd never seen before. The man beside him had to be Adrian. His arm rested across Rowan's shoulders like they were brothers. The third man's face had been folded beneath the edge of the photo, making it impossible to identify him. I turned the picture over. Only 4 handwritten words appeared on the back. Finish what we started. No date, no signature, nothing else. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. What had they started? Why would Rowan keep this hidden from me? I placed the photograph exactly where I had found it. For reasons I couldn't explain, touching it made me feel as though I had stepped into someone else's unfinished story. That evening, I waited until everyone was asleep. Then I climbed into the attic. Our attic held nearly 2 decades of forgotten memories. Baby clothes, Christmas decorations, old tax returns, boxes labeled in my handwriting. I searched for anything from the years before Rowan and I met. Finally, I found an old plastic storage bin marked simply, Rowan College. Dust coated the lid. The tape had yellowed with age. I almost closed it again. Everyone deserves a private past, didn't they? But then I remember the conversation behind the kitchen door. She can never know. My hands trembled as I opened the box. Inside were college textbooks, engineering notebooks, receipts, a baseball cap with the logo of a university team, dozens of photographs. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, flipping through them one by one. Most showed ordinary moments, friends at football games, graduation parties, camping trips, barbecues. Then, there he was, Adrian, the same face from the cemetery photograph, only younger, laughing beside Rowan, standing beside Rowan, celebrating birthdays with Rowan. The two of them appeared together in almost every picture. Best friends, closer than brothers. How could someone so important disappear from Rowan's life without my ever hearing his name? I continued searching. Halfway through the box, I noticed something strange. There was a gap. The photographs jumped from 2007 directly to 2009. Nothing from 2008. Not one birthday. Not one holiday. Not one family gathering. An entire year. Gone. Deliberately gone. I checked every envelope, every folder. Nothing. It was as though someone had carefully removed every memory from that single year. The next morning, I carried one photograph downstairs. Not because I intended to accuse Rowan, because I wanted to see his reaction. He was reading the newspaper while drinking coffee. I placed the picture on the table beside his mug. Who's this? He looked down casually. Then everything changed. His face lost every trace of color. His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. For nearly 3 seconds, he didn't breathe. I had never seen Rowan lose control before. Not once. Finally, he lowered the cup. "Where did you find that?" His voice was calm. Too calm. "In the attic. You went through my college things." "I was organizing." It was another lie. He looked at the photograph again. His thumb brushed lightly across Adrian's face, almost affectionately. Then he quietly pushed it back toward me. His name was Adrian. Was. Past tense. What happened to him? Rowan stared out the kitchen window. For a long time, he said nothing. Finally, he answered. "He died. I know that." Another silence. "It was a long time ago. Why have you never mentioned him?" His jaw tightened. "Because talking about him wouldn't change anything." That wasn't an answer. It was an escape. I leaned forward. "Were you with him when he died?" Rowan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they looked tired. Older somehow. "I can't talk about it." "Can't," I repeated slowly. "Or won't." He stood from the table, picked up his coffee, and before walking away, he said something that made my blood run cold. "Some truths don't destroy the people who keep them." He looked directly into my eyes. "They destroy the people who finally hear them." Then he walked upstairs, leaving me alone in the kitchen. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't sure whether I was chasing my husband's secret or walking straight toward a truth that would change my own life forever. I didn't follow Rowan upstairs. For the first time in 18 years, I was afraid of my own husband. Not because I thought he would hurt me, because I no longer knew which version of him was real. The man who kissed me goodbye every morning, or the man who insisted some truths were better left buried. That afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. "Hello." A woman's voice answered. Calm. Professional. "Mrs. Whitmore." "Yes." "My name is Evelyn." The moment I heard her name, I recognized it. The woman from the cafe. The woman in the breakfast room. The woman Rowan had met in secret. Every muscle in my body tightened. "What do you want?" "I think we need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you." "I understand why you feel that way." "No, you don't." There was a brief silence. Then she spoke softly. "I know you've been following Rowan." My heart nearly stopped. She knew. She knew everything. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You don't have to pretend." Her voice remained strangely gentle. I would have done the same thing. Anger exploded inside me. "So it's true." "What is?" "You and my husband." Another pause. Long enough to make my imagination run wild. Finally, "If that's what you believe," she exhaled slowly, "then you're looking in the wrong direction." I laughed bitterly. "I saw you together." "I know." "I watched you touch his hand." "I know." "I heard both of you talking behind closed doors." "I know." "Then stop lying." "I'm not." Her answer came without hesitation. "If I wanted to destroy your marriage, I wouldn't be calling you." "Then why are you calling?" "Because Saturday changed everything." Those words again. Saturday. The meeting. The cemetery. The photograph. What happened on Saturday? I can't explain that over the phone. "I'm not meeting you." "You already have." "What?" "You just don't remember." I frowned. "That's impossible." "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For what this is about to do to your life." The call disconnected. I stared at the screen in disbelief. For the next hour I replayed every word she had said. "You already have." What did she mean? I had never met her before. I was certain of it, wasn't I? The more I tried to remember, the less certain I became. That evening, Rowan announced he had to leave after dinner. "Just for an hour." "Work?" I asked. He nodded. "One last meeting." Maeve rolled her eyes. "Everything is always work." "I'm sorry." He genuinely looked disappointed. "I'll make it up to you." She shrugged and went upstairs. The front door closed behind him 15 minutes later. I waited exactly 30 seconds. Then I walked into his office. I knew I shouldn't. I knew crossing this line would permanently change our marriage. But I had crossed too many lines already to stop now. His desk was spotless, almost unnaturally neat. Nothing looked out of place. Then I noticed the bottom drawer. Locked. I'd never seen it locked before. I searched the desk. Nothing. Bookshelf. Nothing. Finally, Inside the pocket of the jacket he'd worn that morning, I found a small silver key. My hands shook as I unlocked the drawer. Inside was only one object, a thick brown envelope. No label, no name, just the envelope. I opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs. Every one of them showed Rowan. Some were recent, some were years old. Family vacations, school events, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. Someone had been documenting our lives for years. I turned over one photograph. A handwritten note covered the back. She still doesn't remember. Another photo. He kept his promise. Another. Don't tell her until it's over. My breathing became uneven. What promise? Remember what? I dug deeper into the envelope. At the very bottom, there was a folded newspaper clipping. The date caught my eye immediately. October 14th. 18 years ago. The week Rowan and I got married. The headline wasn't about money. It wasn't about fraud. It wasn't even about Rowan. My eyes stopped on a single sentence buried halfway down the article. Police continue searching for witnesses after a devastating highway collision left one person dead and another woman hospitalized with severe head injuries. I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. A woman. Severe head injuries. No name appeared in the visible portion of the article because the lower half had been torn away. Before I could unfold it further, I heard the sound of the garage door opening. Rowan was home, much earlier than expected. I shoved everything back into the envelope exactly as I had found it, locked the drawer, slipped the key back into his jacket, and hurried into the hallway just as the front door opened. "Elara! I'm in the kitchen. You okay?" "Yeah." He studied my face for several long seconds. Then he smiled, but this time, it didn't reach his eyes. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't the only one keeping secrets anymore. Rowan had begun watching me, just as carefully as I had been watching him. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid Rowan would discover I had searched his office. Because one sentence from the newspaper clipping refused to leave my mind. Another woman hospitalized with severe head injuries. The article was dated the week of our wedding. 18 years ago. The exact moment my life with Rowan had begun. And somehow, I had absolutely no memory of it. Sunday morning felt unnaturally quiet. Rowan was already awake, sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee. 4 years, I would have joined him without a second thought. This morning, I watched him through the kitchen window instead. He looked exhausted. Not guilty. Not nervous. Just defeated. As if he had spent years carrying something too heavy for one person. He noticed me. For the first time in days, he didn't smile. Instead, he quietly said, "Can we talk tonight?" My stomach tightened. About what? Everything. The word echoed inside my head. Everything. Was this finally it? Was he about to confess? Around noon, my phone vibrated again. Another unknown number. I answered immediately. "Evelyn." "Yes." I found the newspaper article. She was silent. "I knew you eventually would. What happened 18 years ago? I can't tell you." "Then who can?" A long pause followed. Finally she answered. "Only Rowan. I don't know if I can believe anything he says anymore." "I know." Her voice sounded almost sympathetic. "But after tonight, you'll understand why he never had a choice." Before I could ask another question, she added one final sentence. "And Elara." "Yes. Don't judge him until you've heard the whole story." The line went dead. That evening, the kids left for a movie with friends. For the first time in days, the house was completely silent. Rowan stood in the living room holding a small wooden box. I had never seen it before. He looked at it for several seconds before speaking. "I've hidden this from you for 18 years. I couldn't answer. I promised someone I would. My voice barely worked. The woman. Evelyn. Who is she?" He closed his eyes. "She's not who you think she is." "Then tell me." He slowly placed the wooden box on the coffee table. Inside were old photographs, hospital bracelets, medical reports, letters, and one sealed envelope with my name written across it, Elara, in Rowan's handwriting. But the paper looked nearly 2 decades old. I wrote that the day after our wedding. I stared at him. "You never gave it to me." "I couldn't." "Why?" His eyes filled with tears. Real tears. "Because." His voice broke for the first time since I'd known him. You never remembered? I felt the room begin to spin. What are you talking about? He pushed a medical report toward me. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words, traumatic brain injury. Below that, patient name, Elara Whitmore. Date, October 14th, 18 years ago. The same date as the newspaper article. No, I whispered. That's impossible. Rowan slowly shook his head. No, it happened. I looked at him in disbelief. I've never been in a serious accident. He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me one final photograph. It showed a crushed sedan on the side of a rain-soaked highway. Emergency lights, paramedics, police cars. The front of the vehicle was completely destroyed. My hands trembled. Who? My voice cracked. Who was inside? Rowan looked directly into my eyes. Then he spoke the sentence that shattered every assumption I'd made since the beginning. You were. Everything around me seemed to disappear. The affair, the investigation, the secret meetings, the envelopes, the hidden photographs. None of them had been protecting Rowan. They had been protecting me. I looked back at the medical report. The doctor's notes blurred through my tears. One sentence remained painfully clear. Patient exhibits extensive retrograde memory loss. Family advised that forced memory recovery may result in severe psychological trauma. I couldn't breathe. No, I whispered. No, that's not possible. Rowan moved closer but didn't touch me. I wanted to tell you. His own tears were falling now. I tried so many times. Then why didn't you? Because every specialist told me the same thing. He swallowed hard. If your memories ever returned, they had to return naturally. I stared at him, unable to speak, unable to think, unable to understand. Then I remember the words carved beneath Adrian Mercer's headstone. You carried the truth until the very end. My heart stopped. I looked back at Rowan. One question escaped my lips, almost involuntarily. What does Adrian have to do with the accident? Rowan closed his eyes. His shoulders trembled. When he opened them again, I saw a pain I had never seen before. And I realized the answer to that single question would change not only the way I saw my husband, but the way I saw myself. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The room felt impossibly small, as if every wall had closed in around me. One question echoed louder than everything else. What does Adrian have to do with the accident? Rowan lowered his head. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he opened the wooden box again. At the very bottom was a sealed envelope I had overlooked. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Rowan. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Across the front, someone had written, "Open only if Elara survives." My chest tightened. Rowan carefully unfolded the brittle paper. I've read this letter hundreds of times, he whispered, but I've never shown it to anyone. He handed it to me. The signature at the bottom read, Adrian Mercer. Rowan, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it. And if Elara survived, promise me one thing. Don't ever let her believe this was her fault. She'll try to remember. She'll blame herself. Don't let her. If she forgets, let her keep forgetting. I'd rather disappear from her memory than let her spend the rest of her life living with guilt. I stopped reading. My hands shook so violently the paper almost slipped from my fingers. What? My voice cracked. What does he mean? Rowan finally looked directly at me. His eyes were red. I've broken almost every promise I've ever made. He swallowed. But that's the one promise I kept. I stared at him. I still don't understand. You will. He reached into the box one last time. This time, he removed a small flash drive. I never wanted you to see this. What is it? The police dashcam footage. My stomach dropped. I obtained it years after the investigation closed. He plugged it into the television. A grainy video appeared. Rain poured across a dark highway. The timestamp read, October 14 to 11:42 p.m., the night after our wedding reception. The patrol car stopped several hundred feet from a wrecked sedan. The officers ran toward it. The camera captured twisted metal, broken glass, flashing lights. Then, the angle shifted. 3 people, not 2. A paramedic shouted, "We've got one female alive." Another voice yelled, "Male passenger, no pulse." Then the camera briefly caught a third figure lying several yards away on the shoulder of the road. Someone covered in blood, trying to crawl, trying to reach the car. That person was Adrian. I covered my mouth. The footage continued. An officer knelt beside Adrian. "You need to stay still." Adrian grabbed the officer's sleeve. His lips moved. The audio was barely understandable. The officer leaned closer, then looked toward the wrecked sedan. The subtitles, added years later by investigators, appeared across the bottom of the screen. "Please, tell her she wasn't driving." Everything inside me stopped. I looked at Rowan. He nodded slowly. "You weren't driving." I frowned. "What?" "You always believed you were." "I don't remember anything." "I know." He took a deep breath. "The reason every doctor told us never to force your memories back was because your mind created its own explanation." I stared at him. "The specialists believe that if fragments ever returned without context, you would convince yourself you caused the crash." I looked back at the screen. "No." Rowan nodded. Adrian was driving. The room became completely silent. He swerved to avoid another vehicle that crossed into his lane. The impact threw him from the car. "He died trying to reach you." Tears streamed down my face. "But," I whispered, "why did everyone hide him from me?" Rowan looked toward the letter. "Because Adrian wasn't just my best friend. He was yours too." I froze. "What?" "You knew him years before you met me." The words barely registered. "You volunteered together after college. You introduced us." I couldn't breathe. "You were the reason we became friends." The room blurred through my tears. "After the accident, you remembered me. You remembered our wedding. You remembered our children as they grew. But you never remembered Adrian. The doctor said your brain had locked away every memory connected to the trauma." I thought back to the cemetery, the photographs, the missing year, the mysterious meetings. "Evelyn, the woman." I whispered, "Who is Evelyn?" Rowan smiled sadly. "Adrian's younger sister." The answer hit harder than anything else. "The meetings. They weren't secret affairs. They were meetings with attorneys, therapists, and Adrian's family." "Why?" "Because every few years, we asked the same question. Should we finally tell you?" I remembered Evelyn's words. "Don't judge him until you've heard the whole story." She had never been protecting herself. She had been protecting me. I collapsed onto the couch, crying harder than I ever had in my life. Not because I had remembered everything. Because I realized how much love had existed inside a silence I had mistaken for deception. For 18 years, I believed my husband had been hiding the truth because he didn't trust me. The truth was exactly the opposite. He hid it because he loved me enough to carry the burden alone. He carried another man's final promise. He carried my forgotten grief. He carried my anger, my suspicion, my accusations, and he never once defended himself. Weeks later, Rowan and I returned to Greenwood Memorial Cemetery together. For the first time, I stood in front of Adrian's grave without fear. I placed fresh white lilies beside the headstone. "I wish I could remember you," I whispered. "But thank you for saving my life." The wind moved gently through the trees. Rowan quietly slipped his hand into mine. This time, there were no more secrets between us. Some memories never returned. The doctors said they probably never would. And for the first time, I was at peace with that, because I finally understood something that had taken me 18 years to learn. The deepest acts of love are not always found in the truths people tell. Sometimes,